Rapper.
Right. Hi.
Hi.
How are you?
I am rather excellent today.
Good.
I thrive on daylight savings time, so I'm like,
You're
bam,
like,
let's go, baby.
yeah. Yeah. Not really me, but that's okay.
Just need the rest of the world to catch up, and we're good to go.
Yeah.
Today's topic.
So really catching up when you don't believe in linear time. So like,
Yeah.
nobody's really catching up. It's arriving at the
Arriving at
moment.
the tangle.
Right. At the same moment you're
Yeah.
arriving at.
Exactly. I don't know why y'all are so married to linear time. It's so inconvenient.
Yeah.
But I think somehow I'm going to make that relate to today's topic. I'll figure that out. But today's topic, the Samaritan
Yeah.
and the sexist.
Yes.
And this should be relatively easy since today's sermon, you're already primed because you were
Right.
preaching off the gospel. What I really want to get through to here is it becomes very clear in this particular reading that Jesus is calling for tons of inclusion.
Yeah.
There's the whole point of, and you've brought this up before, but I think it's worth bringing up today because you didn't bring it up in the sermon. Today, we just equate Samaritan with someone who does good.
Yeah.
But that was a very loaded term when Jesus used that as the example to the lawyer. And I think it's worth repeating why, because that frames why I think the import of what Jesus was saying a lot more.
Yeah. One of my commentaries said Jesus' audience wouldn't have had sympathy with the guy who was beaten up because it was kind of stupid of him. The Jericho Road was like actually a pretty dangerous road, like well known to be dangerous, so everybody would have thought, well, you shouldn't have done that. That was dumb,
So even that back then would have been.
Yeah, and they wouldn't have had sympathy with the Samaritan because they're, from a Jewish perspective, they're kind of like half-breed heretics, all that is wrong with the world.
So they were very vilified?
Yeah, I mean, Amy Jill Levine is a Orthodox Jewish scholar who studies the New Testament, and she says, like, to get the frame of reference of hatred right, you've got to be like, it'd be like if it was the parable of the good Hamas member, you've got to kind of, that's from like a Jewish perspective, how much hatred there was here, so that's kind of the reference point you got to make.
I want to emphasize that point again because that's new to me, that it was that extreme, that it would be like it's the story of the good Hamas now.
Yeah, right. And like that comes, Amy Jill Levine points out, whenever you call somebody a good blank, that's usually pretty insulting, actually,
Yeah.
Except we don't do that in this one case, the Good Samaritan, but yeah, I mean, it's that level of cultural hatred,
So how would the lawyer have reacted just to that? Because in this reading we're getting the Reader's Digest version.
Yeah, I mean, he can't even say the Samaritan word, right? Like he says, if you notice, right? He doesn't even say Samaritan. He just says the one who showed him mercy.
Yeah.
Right. Like can barely get the word out of his mouth.
So it was the S word to them.
Yeah, I mean, they're universally vilified, hated.
Wow.
And
so that's why, because that always struck, even as a kid, that the lawyer doesn't say, he just says the one who showed mercy, not.
Right.
Because Jesus says, the priest, the Levite, and the Samaritan.
Yeah.
The lawyer won't identify it that way.
Right. Yeah, so they're universally hated for old and new grievances.
So going back then, why wouldn't the Levite or the priest, to the extent that they actually go to the other side of the road.
Yeah, everybody always asks this question. Jesus doesn't really, it's a fictional story, right? So and Jesus doesn't give their motivation, and any attempt to read their motivation usually winds up, this is where Amy Jill Levine is helpful, because she's an Orthodox Jew, so she's like, you get all these crazy explanations you've probably heard. Oh, it would have ceremonially...
Yeah, ceremonially
ritually
sullied them.
Right, ritually made them ritually impure. And she says, that's anti-Semitic nonsense, she points out. Like, it's a reading of that's a myth about over-legalistic Jews. It's like, there's clear exceptions in the law for helping somebody who's injured. Like, the law is very clear on this point. Yeah. It's more important to help the guy along the side of the road than to be ritually and ceremonially pure.
So for Jesus, it was just plucking two examples of everyday people in a way.
Well, I mean, two examples. The examples do function in that they are two examples of what I would call good religious folk. Like people you would like SNL's church lady, right? Like there's a caricature of good religious folk, and like that's kind of what he's pulling two examples of good religious folk, and being like, which one actually lived into the law, the good religious folk or the Samaritan
who you hate,
and by his very nature is violating every precept of the law, so,
and yet he's the one who follows the law.
Right, the actual command, this thing we're just saying you do to inherit eternal life, That's kind of the point of picking them. Past that, I don't think you can examining their motivations gets difficult, and I don't know if, it's necessarily all that helpful,
Trying to read too much into what Jesus was doing.
Right. Well, trying to read too much, and again, our explanations almost always drift due to kind of Western culture into anti-Semitic readings of Judaism, and it's like let's just not, they pass by on the other side. That's all you can say.
Yeah, and that's the important thing.
Yeah.
Well, and then we want to follow that up because right after that, Jesus telling that story to make his point.
Yeah.
Is then the story of Martha and Mary. And in that, on the surface, it seems like it's it's reflecting a kind of a sexist attitude towards women, right? That Martha gets angry at Mary because Mary's there with all the guys.
In the kitchen.
Yeah, so you do the woman stuff. Don't sit there with the men talking theology. But it's a little deeper to me when I think about it. It goes beyond sexism, and to me is another example. And the Bible's fraught with them, especially the New Testament. Paul talks about it a lot. Women should be right here with the men. There's nothing.
Yeah.
So again, just like the Samaritan story, Jesus seems to be talking about inclusion. Everybody needs to be hearing this.
Yeah. There's a couple things going on. I mean, I think on a simple level, part of it's just about, we have this instinct as human beings to be like, you're loving Jesus wrong. And like, when somebody loves Jesus in a way we're not used to and we don't think conforms to our expectations, our automatic impulse is to run over there and be like, tell them to stop doing that. They're loving Jesus wrong. And Jesus is kind of like, don't worry about it. Like, why is this of concern to you, Martha? How your sister shows her affection. And actually, if anybody's wrong, you are. She's actually chosen the better one. But, like, I'm not really here to criticize either of you,
Do your thing.
Right, do your thing. Love Jesus. Who's to say how you love Jesus, right? So I think that's number one.
Yeah,
real thing.
So Martha's loving by manja,
right. The eating, the Italian thing, right?
And, whereas Mary's loving in that I want to hear what you have to say.
Right, and Jesus points out that it's actually better to sit at his feet and learn. But I'm not really here to criticize either. We're not really in this game.
Yeah.
Right. There is a sexism thing, but it's kind of second order to an honor shame thing, right? That's going on of so the ancient world viewed honor and shame as like a limited good. It was a fixed pie. So if somebody claimed more honor than was due them,
they were taking it away.
They were necessarily importing shame onto somebody else,
Oh, so it's more like a balance.
Yeah, like trading one off will
increase the other.
Increase the shame on the other, right? Yeah. This is why everybody freaks out every time Jesus claims to be the Son of God, and why his hometown freaks out about it.
Yeah.
Because it's like, necessarily, we know you're just the carpenter's son. By claiming more than you should, we are all at a loss. Yeah. And it's a near infinite loss because you're claiming near infinite status.
Yeah.
Does that make sense?
Yeah, it does.
So you've got Picard, the Riker maneuver. Sorry, folks. But so what's going on here is Mary, by sitting at Jesus' feet, is claiming the status of man, which, yes, is a patriarchal sexism thing, right? Disciples were supposed to be men. And she's claiming this status. But then Mary's objection is not women belong in the kitchen. It's then her objection is then rooted in put her back in her rightful honor shame place because I'm losing out. I'm the one who's gaining shame by her doing this.
Yeah.
Does that make sense?
It does.
So like it is patriarchal, it is sexist, but it's kind of like this second order thing to like her primary objection is actually on honor shame grounds. It's I'm losing out in the honor shame battle with my own sister by her claiming to be in the place of a male disciple.
So this whole honor shame balance thing was like an onion. It had layers and layers and layers.
Yeah.
You know, it was in that one-on-one relationship between Mary and Martha, then the family, then the village,
right?
The nation, blah,
the
blah,
nation,
blah, blah.
Right. Your tribe, your clan, tribe, you know, nation, yada yada yada. So yes, it kind of keeps going on and on. And,
well, Steve has an interesting way of looking at that whole situation. He says that Mary and Martha seem like it's the contrast between female duties to the house versus duty to God.
Yeah.
And in a way, what you're saying, almost like, I'm kind of seeing it as female duties are to the house, men's duties are to God.
Yeah, or at least learning from, right? You know, your duty to God is found in the house. You know, your duty to God for men is found. It's where the duty is found, right? You know, you both have a duty to God and what you do, but it's like your duty to God is found in certain roles, right? Like in the house, women were usually through the gossip network, like the policers of people's honor shame.
Oh, fascinating.
You know, it's like it actually wasn't the men's job to police it. It was the women's job to police it, you know.
And they spread it through their grapevine.
Right, you know.
Now that's fascinating because isn't there a part of the Bible that says gossip is evil?
Well, yeah, this is why. Right, you know,
okay.
I mean, this is, there are many places. It's actually one of the more condemned sins.
Is gossip.
Right, it's gossip, and this is why, right? One of the reasons, many reasons.
Well,
you know. So, yeah, I mean, it is sort of that, you know, and Jesus is sort of saying that's not how this works, you know. Right, Jesus is kind of saying that's not how any of this works, you know. So, yeah, I'm not going to do that, Martha. Sorry.
Well, this kind of gets me into...
He is being radically inclusive. It's just the objections are a little more complicated than
what we see today.
Right, than women are supposed to be doing the dishes, right? You know, there's this thing of like, you can't overstate how big a deal it is to like claim place that's not actually belonging to you.
Yeah.
You know.
Well, this is a semi-loaded question, so I'm asking from a religious perspective.
Yeah.
Is that part of the issue we're having today with the rabid cancellation of DEI, diversity, equity, and inclusion that's going on in the U.S.? Is it rooted in that same
place?
Yeah. Is it ultimately coming in 2,000 years? We still have a little bit of that
honor.
That honor shame that you're going out of your place. You should just be doing X, Y, or Z.
Right. I think. Yeah.
And this is important to me because through the Bible, especially with Jesus
I will say
Jesus is so DEI.
Yeah.
Why are we not now?
Right. I will say America's not an honor shame culture. We're just not. We never have been. It's not in our bloodstream. We are not. We don't have any of the hallmarks of an honor shame culture, right? And in fact, we tend to bluster around and offend honor shame cultures because we have no idea what we're doing
when we go there.
And whether we're tourists or invading or whatever, we just have no sense of how to behave in these cultures, because we're just not, we're a guilt culture, we're sometimes it's called psychological culture, right? Honor shame cultures. We have this thing, right? Americans, so this is how you can tell we're not an honor shame culture, right? Americans do this thing where we tell our kids, right? Well, what other people say about you doesn't matter. It's what you believe about yourself, right?
And we say that to adults too.
We say that to adults too, right? Honor shame culture wouldn't believe that in the slightest. They think it's hooey. Actually, what people do say about you does define you. It's the opposite reverse, right? There's not a lot interiorly.
So it's not just that we don't understand honor shame cultures, it's 180 degrees away from how we think.
Right, from how we're orientated.
Yeah.
Yes. Yeah. So they're not psychological. Not that they don't have those interior feelings, but those aren't primary, whereas for us, they're primary.
Individualism all the way.
Right. Yeah. It's like you're
the
actually
whole thing of don't tread on me. I have my rights.
Right. You're defined by actually what the gossip network says about you. You're always trying to win that gossip network game.
It's a whole different thrust.
Right. It's a whole different thrust. So this is why we're not this. So not that. That said, okay, so this is where I'm still sort of a small c conservative, right? In that I would argue, like all good things in life, they can also be marred by sin, right? So hierarchy is actually one of these gifts, I would argue, is given by God, and when it's working well, you can see that, right? Organizations that function well, people have places, there's order,
things get done.
People are in charge, things get done, right? There's a clear chain of command. Not only does that chain of command allow things to get done, but frequently that chain of command helps transform people, right? The military is the clearest example of this, where a Marine isn't just a Marine by the time he gets out, he's a Marine, right? There's a whole transformation that takes place through that hierarchy, right? When it but sin infects absolutely everything, even the good things, right? Even God's good gifts get infected by sin, right? And so
that's where we get bureaucracy as opposed to hierarchy.
Right. So that's where we get bureaucracy instead of hierarchy. And hierarchy can go really bad when people start using that as an excuse to say, this is your place, never escape it. Which is a very deeply embedded human instinct.
Yeah.
Right. And especially when that becomes based on all sorts of characteristics that are actually about hate, whether it's ethnically Samaritans, or racism in modern America, or sexism and gender and sex difference, sexuality differences, this is how sin works in our lives, right? This thing which actually allows us to function, right? In many ways, also gets infected and turned into this thing which condemns and kills us quite literally, often, and so that doesn't mean the thing in and of itself is bad, right? It just means, there is this sinful aspect to this thing, which is unfortunate. Part of being in the world until Christ returns.
That gives me a whole new vantage point on that. I'm going to have to spend some time processing it because it's very different, from what I've encountered before.
What do you mean?
That as an explanation for why, for for want of a term that's also become kind of a hot button issue, but for the existence of things like that are systemic issues. You know, and I know we cringe from the word systemic now, but
no, but there are systemic issues.
Yeah.
You know, I mean, sin is actually, you know, the original systemic issue is sin, right?
And all others branch from that.
Right. You know, I mean, this is what the doctrine, like, I never get why Christians object to systemic issues, because, like, at the heart of it, the doctrine of original sin is acknowledging there's a systemic issue that's beyond just individual action. You know, like, actually our doctrine is based off, most of our first principles are from this idea, you know.
Of systemic sin.
Right, of systemic issues, right?
Yeah.
You know, and so original sin is a systemic problem. It's, you know, this is why the baby is still born in sin, right? It's not that they've done individually anything wrong, but...
Yeah, they're pure innocence.
Right, but they still are born in sin, you know, because there's a systemic issue at work. Yeah, and so a lot of our issues are not just individual people being bad, but, you know, the work of this systemic sin at work in even the good things that God has given us to allow our communities to function. You know, government hierarchy, you know, those kind of things.
Yeah.
Sorry, anarchists, I'm not one of you. You know,
I don't know. You've leaned into anarchy.
I've leaned into it, so they have some good critiques, but I'm not really one of you. You know.
Well, given all that, why do we try? Not try. Why do we intentionally keep blinders on about the systemic issues that we have in modern society?
Oh. Like the lawyer, there's often this self-justifying thing, right? Like, I've preached before on this parable, and I've said, you know, we've all got little lawyers inside of us, you know, ready to try and justify ourselves, you know. And so, you know, we all share this instinct to go, well, surely I'm not culpable there, you know, and I know that because who is my neighbor, Lord? You know,
yeah.
Like, we all kind of ask some version of that question, right? And well, Jesus's point is, like, the guy you're supposed to show mercy to in front of you is your neighbor, you know, like Gustavo Gutierrez, who's a liberation theologian, says, and Luther says the same thing too, actually, that it's not merely a fulfillment of the commandment if you love your neighbor when they come to you for kindness. You know, both Luther and Gutierrez say you actually have to go out and actively seek your neighbor who needs kindness. That's the only way this law is actually fulfilled. You know, merely waiting for people to come to you, they say, like, what good is that? Even
can you give me a cup of sugar?
Right, even the worst people do that.
Yeah.
You know, like, the actual fulfillment commandment lies in actively seeking out, you know, actively. Gutierrez is telling, you know, the difference between the Levite, the priest, and the Samaritan is that passing by on the other side, literally. You know, the Samaritan put this guy in his way in order to care for him and show him kindness. The Levites just bypass him.
Yeah.
You know, and in that lies the difference between true kindness and compassion and, you know, religious bullshit, you know, for lack of a better word. Like,
well, yeah, well, I like that because, and it dovetails, Steve just made a comment that aren't we all looking for the easy path?
Right, we
but
are.
But the path God wants us to travel is a hard one.
Right, it's a hard one, right? I mean, right, it's hard and it sucks, and, you know, I quote this all the time, but my favorite line from C.S. Lewis is from A Horse and His Boy, right, where he says, a good deed usually merits a harder, much more difficult deed. You know, like, there's no payoff reward for it other than eternal life, you know, and life with your God. But until then, it's a bunch of suffering because we're called to continually place these people who need kindness in our path.
Yeah. And I'm wondering if that's a deeper layer to the concept of grace, is that even eternal life isn't the goal. You should be doing it just because. Because that's still, if you're saying I'm doing it for eternal life, well,
right,
it's still transactional.
I mean, if you're looking for pure, I mean, this is why, I mean, back to basic Lutheranism, right? Like, you can never earn it, because even in your trying to earn it, your motives are never pure, right? You know, and
so why bother being transactional? Just do it because it's the right thing to do.
Right. Or don't worry about, even if your motive, don't worry about your motives, because you're saved by grace. You know, even if you are being transactional about it, you're still saved by grace. So, you know, like, be transactional, but at least acknowledge you're being transactional because you were first that guy along the side of the road, and Jesus came and bound you up and healed you, you know.
Threw a couple denarii your way.
Yeah. Right. It's actually not, it's a lot of money. It's like 2 weeks' pay, you know.
Wow.
That he like hands over. Yeah.
So even that, in the time that people hearing Jesus say it,
right,
would have been an even more merciful act.
Back to my point about the crowd. The crowd would not have had sympathy for the Samaritan, would not have had sympathy for the guy or the Levite or the priest. They would have had sympathy for the bandits, actually.
Wow.
Yeah.
As a gut instinct.
As a gut instinct. That's who the crowd would have sympathized with.
Fascinating. But why?
Well, because the bandits were people pushed off their land by people like the priest and the Levite and the rich guy, and you know.
So banditry then wasn't like an occupation per se. Like today, we would just say a bank robber is a bank robber.
Right.
We don't go into a motivation that they were wronged or anything like that.
Well,
but to them,
they might be like, you know, I just like killing people along the side of the road, but the general populace tended to view bandits as Robin Hoods, you know, in their struggle against these rich people who keep pushing us off our land and absorbing us into their big estates and things like that.
See, we need that cultural context, because that really frames the story of the Good Samaritan.
Yeah. I mean, this
in
guy,
a fresh light.
Right. So this is why it's like the beaten up broken guy, they would have thought he was dumb, you know.
Yeah.
Like the road from Jerusalem to Jericho descends like 3,000 feet over like 20 miles. It's actually like it's windy. Like, people knew not to travel it because
lots of places for bandits to hide.
Right. Lots of, like, they would have thought, oh, this guy's dumb. He shouldn't have gone on this trip alone, much less on this road at all.
Yeah.
You know, he deserved to get beaten up along the side of the road, you know.
Wow.
So that's the kind of cultural context of the story.
Yeah. That's interesting. I mean, in modern terms, we see that as sympathy for the devil, you know, because the bandits are evil.
Right. I mean, this is where we're middle class. We're middle class people reading a world that does not have the middle class.
Yeah.
You know, I mean,
they're the rich or poor.
Yeah. I mean, it's the true 1%, 99%. There was some estimate recently that something like 70% of the city, even the city of Rome, like heart of the empire, you know, the place where all the wealth flowed to, right? Like, but even in Rome itself, like 70% of the population was on public assistance of some public welfare of some kind, you know, like even there, you know, the vast majority of people are on the dole or are on welfare, you know.
Wow.
So we just have another author I put it said, their society was based not on a like arithmetic scale, but on a logarithmic scale, you know. That.
Well, given that was, and this may have to be a topic for a episode all on its own, because we only have a minute left, but is that part of why Jesus was so popular? Why did he appeal to the masses, to the poor so much?
Yeah, I mean,
I can see some of it being his focus on DEI, you know, that you all benefit from what I'm saying.
I would probably put it as, you know, it's the true 99%, 1%, right? You know, and vast majority of people are dirt poor, barely making it, might starve.
Yeah. So what in Jesus' message would appeal to those people?
And then to those people, you have a message that says, rather than run through, you have direct access to the most holy God, you know, who promises salvation and you need not go through any other vehicle but me.
So who were the vehicle then?
Well, there are all these. There are lots of people offering salvation, right? But you had these whole institutions. You had the temple. Jesus rails against the temple all the time, right? You have the whole temple institution, but you got to pay tithes to the temple institution on top of the Roman taxes, and the temple tithe might be appropriated by the Romans once in a while whenever they feel like it, and and
so the rich are just getting richer,
right?
Even at the temple,
and they're collaborating with the Romans, and and the high priest's appointed by the Romans, and and so and then you got the Pharisees, but the Pharisees are telling you to do all these really complicated things that just make your life more difficult, and you've got the Essenes, but their answer is to be madmen out in the wilderness, So
they're on the other extreme.
Right, they're on the other extreme, right? And they're thinking the world's going to end, and it's probably not, And so you've got all these people, and then you got the zealots who are recruiting, but they're revolutionaries, but they're just trying to kick the Romans out to put their own people
in power,
right? This is the problem this is where the anarchists are right. It's the problem of all revolutions, and along comes this Jesus guy who says, hang them all, follow me, right? And just ignore all these other people.
Yeah.
They don't count for anything.
And I'm not exclusive, so it doesn't matter who you are.
Right.
You're welcome with me.
Right, you're welcome with me. Be a pretty powerful message, actually, in that society.
Yeah. Well, one last thing then to follow up on that. Is that why, when you read the Gospels, this may be too strong a word, but it seems like Jesus just loathes rich people. Even phrases like, it's easier to get through the eye of a needle.
Yeah, he doesn't have a lot of...
He's not kind to the rich.
No, he doesn't have a lot of sympathy with them, There are rich guys who do the, we've got Joseph of Arimathea, and, those people, right?
Yeah, whoever supplied the donkey.
Right, you do have these people, right, who, it's a mixed crowd, and almost immediately after that, it's a very mixed crowd, right?
Yeah.
It's mostly poor, but you got people, like Paul says, and Corinth has got the city treasurer in their congregation, right? You've got powerful people there.
Or even those, I want to say rumors, but they're not alive anymore, so I'm not sure that would be rumors, but that Pilate's wife was a secret Christian.
Right, the kind of, the legends and stuff like that, right? And, so all that is to say, not that it's exclusively against the rich, but getting back to the systematic thing, Jesus doesn't have a lot of patience for the ways they try and justify themselves, We
may have to get deeper on this, but we're out of time now.
That's all right.
But I'm definitely going to mark that one for follow-up.
Said it in our psalm, right? Those who are righteous are those who do not lend at interest.
Yeah, that would be good today, too.
There went the whole banking system right there.
All right, and as ever, if you have questions, let us know. Be like Steve, interact. You can email.
Yep, email away.
Yeah, office@relc.org is probably the easiest to remember, so do that. But otherwise, you can put things, comment live on YouTube, however you want to do it. And we follow up. We look at other comments afterwards, so let us know.
Yep.
We will be off next week. We got a meeting, and then after that, we're back.
So. And we're back. Almost like we're on a roll again.
That's right. And we're in Lent, so especially have big questions like, why fish? Let us ask. We'll ask and answer.
That one's simply because Rome needed to subsidize the fishing industry.
So even then, government price supports.
Yeah. Tariffs, man. Even back then.